At 12, I saved up birthday money for white sneakers, and within a week they'd become family shoes, because Brianna decided hers pinched. When a teacher praised me, my mother repackaged the compliment before it ever reached the dinner table. Smaller, quieter, not something worth lingering on. Lingering was rationed. I want to be fair, because fairness is the whole point of this story. My parents never raised a hand to me. I was fed, clothed. My name is Celeste Bishop, and I'm 29. 11 years ago, 3 days shy of my 18th birthday, my parents scrapped my party because my older sister sobbed that it made her feel invisible. I packed up and left that very night. 2 duffel bags, a coffee can, holding $1,300, and one call to the only grown-up who'd ever paid me on time. What went down a year later at my grandmother's 80th, right in the middle of a flower field I'd grown with my own 2 hands, is the part my family still refuses to speak of. My sister stood in that field, took in everything I'd built, and fell apart in front of 30 relatives. The break that followed split our family clean in half, and it's never healed. But here's what none of them ever grasped. I wasn't the one who broke us. I just quit holding us together. Welcome back to Arma Never Sleeps, where women once told to shrink finally get to tell the whole thing, calmly, start to finish. If you've ever been the one who was fine on her, this episode is for you. Leave a comment and subscribe, because you'll want to be with us when we reach that field. To make sense of the birthday, I first have to make sense of the house. Our family operated like an ER. Whoever was bleeding the loudest got everything. The money, the attention, both parents at once. And my sister Brianna was always the loudest bleeder. I figured out the arithmetic at 7. My 2nd grade recital landed the same evening Brianna, then 10, developed a stomachache that vanished by 9. Nobody showed up to hear me sing. My mother laid it out in the car, calm as a bank teller counting cash. Your sister needed us. You did great, I'm sure, driven where I needed to go. But in the Bishop house, fine, wasn't a feeling. It was a job title. I got hired for it at 7 and never once clocked out. The only one who ever saw the math was my father. He'd catch my eye across the ruins of another wrecked evening and watch it like weather he had no intention of coming inside from. The summer I turned 15, he found me pulling weeds in Grandma Ruth's flower beds and said, out of nowhere, 18 is yours, kid. Whatever you want, I promise. I buried that promise deeper than anything I'd ever planted. That was my mistake. It took 3 years to grow into the worst night of my life. You should understand my sister, too, because this story isn't kind to her either, just in a different way. Brianna was 21 that fall, 3 years older than me, and had already started and quit 2 different colleges. Each exit followed the same script: a midnight phone call, a manufactured crisis, my mother deploying like the National Guard. Nobody in our house ever used the word failed. Brianna wasn't supported enough. Brianna was more sensitive than most people. Every collapse got renamed until it sounded clinical, and every diagnosis arrived with a bill my parents were thrilled to cover. Here's what I only understood years later. They built her that way. From the crib on, Brianna was told she was fragile. So fragile is exactly what she became. Needing things was her entire identity, the same way not needing anything was mine. We were both cast in our roles before we could even talk. The clearest snapshot I can offer is the night of my 4-H banquet, spring of 16. I'd won a county ribbon for a raised bed system I'd designed myself. The first thing I was ever publicly good at. My parents actually came, which stunned me. Then Brianna called crying from a parking lot about some boyfriend, and dinner ended before the awards did. I rode home with the ribbon in my lap. In the kitchen, Brianna spotted it, and her face crumpled like I'd struck her. Tonight was awful, she said, and you're standing there with a prize. It's supposed to be about me right now. She said it like reciting a house rule, because in our home, it was won. My mother made her tea. Nobody asked to see the ribbon. I pinned it inside my closet door, where the things that belonged to me had to live. What kept me sane was dirt. At 14, I started working weekends at Hollis Greenhouse, on the edge of town, hauling trays and scrubbing pots for June Hollis. 63 years, old, built like a fence post, physically unable to flatter anyone. June paid me in wages, rolls, and blunt advice, which meant she paid me more than anyone in my life ever had. By 17, I could run her seed room solo. Every check went straight into a savings account. At First Hartwell Bank, $9,412 by that September. 3 years of Saturdays. One detail matters here. I'd opened that account at 14, and the bank required an adult, co-owner, so it was joint with my mother. At 17, I asked to open one in my own name. The teller said I'd need a parent to co-sign until I turned 18. My mother smiled and said, "After your birthday, sweetheart, one thing at a time." She said the same thing, again in June and again in August. I noticed. I want that on record, I noticed. So I started, skimming from my own earnings, 20 here, 40 there, folding the bills into an empty. Coffee can I kept behind my winter boots. By September, the can held $1,300. I told myself I was being paranoid, that mothers aren't weather you need to track. Looking back, I wasn't paranoid. I was just slow. The rest of my money stayed put because a 17-year-old can't outrank a co-signature, and because part of me still believed that account was shared. Ground, not, as it actually was. Someone else's land, farmed by me. The party I'd planned wasn't much by most standards. Dinner in Grandma Ruth's backyard. String lights in the maple tree. A sheet cake from Hartwell Bakery. Chocolate, cream filling, my name piped in yellow icing. 15 people on folding chairs. June invited and grumbling. About coming anyway. That was the entire dream. One evening, one table, every set of. Eyes pointed at the same person for once. And that person was me. My father had promised, and for 3 years I'd carried that promise around like a seed. Packet, checking the date on it. 18 was also a doorway. I'd been accepted into the state agricultural program starting that spring, and beyond it, blurry but real, sat the only future I ever wanted, a cut flower farm with my name on the sign. Grandma Ruth was the one who'd planted that shape in my head. She grew dahlias behind her house on Maple Street. A deep crimson strain her family had kept alive since the year my father was born, petals so dark they looked like velvet swallowing light. That August, she walked me past her, rose, tapped a bloom, and said, "Flowers don't apologize for taking up a bed, Celeste. Notice that." I did. I noticed it the way you notice a door left standing open. Then, 3 weeks before my birthday, Brianna announced program number 3A, Wellness and Design Semester in Columbus. Extremely exclusive, extremely urgent. It needed a deposit immediately, she said, or her spot would go to someone whose family actually believed in them. I remember exactly where I was standing when she said that, because the kitchen went quiet in the way I'd been trained since childhood to recognize, the sound of money changing direction. Brianna lasted 11 days in Columbus. 4 days before my birthday, a Friday, she came. Home at 1 in the morning. I heard the front door, then that particular pitch of crying that meant furniture was about to get rearranged around it. By breakfast, the house had a new center of gravity. My mother moved through the kitchen like a triage nurse, murmuring into her phone. My father sat with his coffee, studying the table. Brianna claimed the middle of the couch, wrapped in the good blanket, narrating the injustice of Columbus to anyone who wandered by. I made toast and said nothing, because that was my assignment. That evening, I overheard my mother in the hallway, on the phone with Aunt Patty, my father's sister. Her voice had that planning register, low and smooth, the one she used when a story was being tailored for public consumption. I caught the phrase, "What's best for thee?" Family right now, and then the smaller one aimed at me without using my name. Well, she's got her whole life for parties. I stood in my room with a stack of hand-lettered invitations, 15 envelopes I'd never mailed, because some part of me had already known better than to make it official. I drew a tiny dahlia on each one. I slid them into my desk drawer, face down, and told myself the math could still work out, that a girl only turns 18 once, and surely that outranked homesickness. The next morning, Saturday, my mother knocked with 2 mugs of cocoa. She had her gift, rapping voice on, and I knew before she said a word exactly which gift was about to get returned. She perched on my bed and arranged her face into something like tenderness. Sweetheart, about Tuesday. My birthday had become a mere day of the week. Your dad and I have been talking. With everything your sister's going through, throwing a party, right now would just rub salt in it. She'd see you celebrating while her life's falling apart. Honey, it would break her. I asked what exactly they had in mind. Postpone, she said, bright as a coupon. Just until Brianna's stronger. We'll do something small later. Family only. Later. In the Bishop house, later was where my things went to die. I looked at her and did something I'd never once done at that kitchen table in my entire life. I asked the real question. When is my turn actually scheduled? Mom, I'd like to see the calendar. Her face flickered, then settled, and she delivered the sentence that has trailed. Me for 11 years. Oh, Celeste, don't be dramatic. You've always been fine on your own. There it was, the family constitution, read aloud at last. Being fine was my contribution, the tax I paid to keep the household balanced. Behind her, my father appeared in the doorway, and this is the part that stayed sharp longer than anything else. He looked at me, and he knew. 18 is yours, kid, I promise. His hand landed on the door frame, his mouth opened, and then Brianna called up from downstairs, wet and urgent, and the doorway emptied. 30 seconds, maybe less. That's how long it takes a 3-year promise to collapse. My mother squeezed my knee on her way out. You'll understand when you have a sensitive child, she said. I sat very still after they left, listening to the house rearrange itself around my sister one, floor below. I didn't rage, and I didn't beg. And if you've ever been the strong one, you already know why. Practice. What I did instead was open my laptop and check the account balance. Then, that evening, the bakery called. Not to cancel, but to confirm changes to Order 41. I said I hadn't requested any changes. She read them out anyway, cheerful and oblivious, each word, landing like gravel. Same cake, new pickup day. Saturday, new inscription. They'd kept. My chocolate sheet cake, the one with cream filling I'd picked out in July, scraped my name off the ticket and replaced it. It now read, Welcome home, Brianna. There would be a celebratory dinner the following Saturday, 4 days after my birthday would have passed, unmarked, and the guest list, I learned later, matched mine almost exactly. Same aunts, same cousins, same folding chairs. My party hadn't been postponed. It had been stripped. For parts. I thanked the bakery girl, since none of this was on her, hung up, and stood in my room, while something in my chest went very quiet and very level, like a field right after the harvester rolls through. People assume decisions like mine get made in a blaze. Mine wasn't. It arrived the way frost does. Clear sky, no wind, everything simply finished growing. I pulled my 2 duffel bags off the closet shelf. I packed work clothes, boots, the ribbon from the closet door, the 15, envelopes I'd never sent. I dug the coffee can out from behind my boots and counted it by feel. Then I sat on my bed and made exactly 1 call to the only adult who had ever paid. Me on time and on purpose. June Hollis listened for maybe 10 seconds. There's a bed in the loft above the seed room, she said. It's drafty. Rent's $40 a month, and you'll earn it before sunup. Come or don't. My birthday was still 3 days out. I didn't wait for it. I left that same night. Walking out of the house you grew up in takes about 4 minutes, if it turns out you've been. Packing your whole life without knowing it. I came down the stairs, a duffel on each shoulder. My mother sat at the kitchen island with her tea. She looked at the bags, then at me, and chose irritation over alarm. Oh, for heaven's sake, Celeste, don't be theatrical. Where exactly do you think you're going? I told her I had work in the morning, which was true, and left the rest unsaid. Brianna watched from the couch, blanket pulled to her chin, and for half a second, something crossed her face that looked almost like envy of the bags, the door, of being the one who got to leave. My father followed me out to the porch. He pressed a folded envelope into my hand. $60 in fives and tens, the cash of a man who'd been, quietly emptying his pockets into a drawer for a while. "Call your grandmother on Sundays," he said. "She'll worry. He didn't say don't go." We both heard him not say it. I walked the 2 miles to Hollis Greenhouse under a sky the color of a bruised plum, and when I let myself into the seed room, the warm smell of soil met me like someone glad-eyed, shown up. The loft was exactly as drafty as promised. Lying on that narrow bed, I finally understood something I'd been circling for years. Being fine was the rent I paid to live in that house. That night, I stopped paying it. 3 days later, I turned 18 over a grocery store cupcake, one candle stuck in it by June, who looked embarrassed by her own gesture. On Wednesday morning, I went to the bank to collect 3 years of Saturdays and finally open an account with no cosigner. Required, planning to move my savings over. The teller pulled up the joint account and her smile did the thing bank smiles do when the screen and the customer disagree. The balance read $912. $8,500 had been withdrawn 3 weeks earlier, right around the time Brianna's extremely exclusive Columbus program needed its deposit immediately. Every stall suddenly made sense. After your birthday, sweetheart, one thing at a time. My mother hadn't been forgetting to co-sign my paperwork. She'd kept the gate propped open until she was finished harvesting the field. And here's the part I need every listener to really sit with. It was completely legal. A joint. Account belongs to both names on it. She didn't steal a cent, as far as the law's concerned. She simply spent 3 years of my Saturdays on a program my sister abandoned in 11 days. I called her from the parking lot. She didn't even hesitate. Family money goes where the family needs it, Celeste. Your sister's future was on the line. You're young, you're healthy. You'll earn it back in no time. Then, gentler, like a tip left for a waitress, this is just what families do. I went back in, withdrew the $912, and closed the account with steady hands. I let them shake once I was back in the truck June had lent me. By Sunday, my mother had already broadcast her version to the entire family. The party, the bags, the bank. I found out from a voicemail. Apparently, I was now the villain of a story I hadn't even been allowed to read. The official Bishop family account went like this. Celeste, threw a tantrum over a birthday party, abandoned her sister during a mental health crisis, and stormed off to punish everyone. It made the rounds at church, at the salon, and especially well with Aunt Patty, who left me this voicemail. "I'm just disappointed, honey. Your mother is heartbroken. A party, Celeste? Really? I didn't call back to argue, and I want to explain why. It wasn't weakness. My mother had spent 52 years rehearsing the role of family narrator, arguing with her in front of her. Audience would have been an away game against a Hall of Famer. I decided my version of events would have to grow up out of the ground, somewhere nobody could talk over it. The first Sunday of October, a mud-brown sedan pulled into the greenhouse lot, and my grandmother Ruth climbed out. 79, cane in one hand, shoebox tucked under the other arm. She scanned the seed room like she was inspecting a fence line, then set the box on the potting bench. Inside, nestled in wood shavings, were dahlia tubers. Lumpy, homely, Miraculous. Dug from the crimson row behind her house on Maple Street, a strainer. Family had kept going since the year my father was born. You know what these are? It wasn't really a question. Plant them somewhere they'll get looked at. Then she patted my cheek with a hand like paper and said she was missing her program. I made it all the way to her taillights before I finally broke down. And notice, it took kindness to do it. Being robbed hadn't managed that. Being given something did. That fall and winter, my life shrank into a rhythm you could set a clock to. Greenhouse from 5:30 to 2, hauling and watering, learning June's seed room like scripture. Diner shift after. That, till 10, carrying blue plate specials to men who tipped in quarters and unsolicited. Advice. Back in the loft, I read June's battered growing manuals till the words blurred. Succession planting, cold hardiness, stems per row foot. I filled a spiral notebook with plans and crossed most of them out, which June assured me was the entire job. I also wrote to the state agricultural program and deferred my spot a year. I told them it was financial. It was. But it was also this. Somewhere between the bank and the shoebox, my plan had changed shape entirely. Meanwhile, across town, my $8,500 had bought my sister a semester she never completed, and a bedroom she never left. Grandma Ruth reported in every Sunday, dry as toast. Your sister's resting, your mother's managing, your father's mowing a lawn that stopped growing, back in October. Let me pause here, because I know some of you are living this exact winter right now. If you've ever pulled a double shift while the person who took from you slept in your old room, tell me in the comments. I read every one. And if this story is starting to feel like your own, go ahead and subscribe now, because the next part is where the ground finally turns. Thanksgiving was approaching, and my mother has never in her life let a holiday sit unused. She called the Monday before, voice warm as a casserole dish. We want you at the table, sweetheart. This nonsense has gone on long enough. We're ready to put the whole outburst behind us. I asked what behind us actually required, because with my mother, forgiveness always came itemized. She listed the terms like a recipe. I'd apologize to Brianna in front of everyone for making her setback about me. I'd move back into my old room where they could keep an eye on me. I'd start contributing to the household now that I was so eager to. Work. And I'd drop this little gardening phase before I embarrassed myself further. I remember staring out the loft window at June's dead winter field while she talked. 2 acres of frosted grass. And feeling a strange calm settle in. And if I say no? Her voice, cooled exactly 1 degree. We worry about your sister, Celeste. She's delicate. You've always been fine. Honestly, it's the one thing we never had to think twice about. There it was again. Article 1 of the Family Constitution. I thanked her for the invitation and told her I had to work Thanksgiving morning. The silence on the line took on a shape. Then, don't bother coming at Christmas either, she said, and hung up first. She always hung up first. I stood there with the phone against my ear anyway, listening to nothing. What I didn't know that night was that it would be nearly 10 months before I heard my mother's voice again. And by then, everything about the ground between us would look completely different. Christmas Eve, the greenhouse closed, the loft so quiet I could hear the propane heater, deciding whether to quit. I won't dress this part up, because some of you have sat in this exact chair. I wrote my mother a Christmas card. Took an hour, 4 drafts, the final one, whittled down to almost nothing. Merry Christmas, Mom. I'm safe. I'm working. I sat there, with the stamp on my tongue, and realized, with a clarity that tasted like glue, that I wasn't writing to my actual mother. I was writing to one I'd invented, the version who'd read it at. The sink, soften, and drive over with Coco. That woman didn't live at my parents' address. I put the card in the drawer with my 15 unsent invitations. The collection was growing. Around 8, headlights swept the lot, and Grandma Ruth let herself into the seed room, with a tin of molasses, cookies, and zero explanation for whatever she'd told my parents about her whereabouts. We ate them beside the seedling heat mats while she inspected my spiral notebook like an auditor, which, looking back, she basically was. June stomped in, near 9 with something wrapped in butcher paper, a heavy spool of striped grosgrain, ribbon, the good kind. "For your first market table," she said, daring me to make it a moment. I didn't dare, but once they'd gone, I stood the spool on the windowsill where the invented mother's card would have sat, and it looked exactly like what it was, a bet. Too old. Women wagering on a girl with $900 and a shoebox. In January, June raised the stakes herself, with an offer that came with a contract and zero sentiment. Second week of the month, she walked me out to the back field in boots and a dead man's barn coat and made me the proposal that split my life into before and after. 2 acres behind the greenhouses, south-facing, waterline already run to the old sheep trough. "I don't do charity," she said before I could speak. 3 seasons, 900 a season, first season up front. You bring your own sweat, your own seed, your own mistakes, written down properly. Both our signatures, so neither of us gets sentimental about it. $900 was nearly everything left in the account, and whatever remained in. The coffee can was already earmarked. Trellis netting, silage tarps, a used walk behind, tiller with a wobble. I stood on the frozen ground, ran the math 3 times, and the math said no while something underneath it said now. I signed at her kitchen table that Friday. 2 acres, $900, and a shoebox. That was my entire inheritance, and it turned out to be enough. That same week, a letter from the state ag program sat on my windowsill, asking me to confirm my deferred spot. I let the deadline pass on purpose. I'll be honest, it scared me. Worse than leaving home had. Leaving home, I'd had somewhere to walk toward. This time, I was stepping off the edge of my own map. 18 years old, no college, no family, no fallback on land I didn't even own. But you can't grow anything with one foot still out of the field. That February, when the ground finally gave, I buried Grandma Ruth's crimson tubers in trays of damp shavings to wake them, and the first green shoots broke the surface the exact. Morning, the county paper would have called me foolish. Spring made me pay for my confidence almost immediately. I'd started ranunculus and sweet peas early, and in late April I planted out ahead of schedule because the 10-day forecast smiled at me and I wanted to jump on Mother's Day sales. Then a frost slid down out of Canada on a clear, windless night, the kind that never announces itself, just arrives and files its paperwork. I walked the rows at dawn, breath fogging, and found $400 of seedlings reduced to wet brown rags. I'd known better. June's books had told me. June herself had told me. I'd heard the warning and gambled anyway, because hope is a gorgeous liar. I gave myself exactly 1 hour to feel sick about it, parked on an overturned bucket at the end of the ruined row. Then I grabbed the notebook and logged the date, the temperature, and the lesson, because self-pity doesn't compost into anything, but records do. June wandered out around 7, surveyed the damage, hands in her pockets, and delivered the eulogy. "Frost isn't a verdict, girl. It's tuition," we replanted. I leaned harder into the tougher stock. Zinnias, cosmos, sunflowers, snapdragons under low tunnels, and babied the dahlias in their trays like they were in a maternity ward, because they weren't just plants. They were the only heirloom anyone had, ever handed me. By the last week of May, the field had gone from graph paper to actual. Green rose straight enough that June grunted at them, which from her counted as a parade. By the first Saturday of June, I had a problem the spiral notebook had never once anticipated. Buckets and buckets of flowers, cut and conditioned and gorgeous, with nowhere to sell them. The Hartwell Farmers Market rented 8 feet of Saturday for $15. I took the spot between the honey vendor and the goat soap woman, dressed a borrowed card table in June's striped ribbon, and lettered a chalkboard at midnight. Mixed Bouquets, $15. Zinnias like carnival glass, cosmos, snapdragons, blue bachelor's buttons. I wrapped 30 bouquets in craft paper, quietly terrified of hauling 29 of them back. Home. My first customer, a retired teacher, bought 2 and told me nobody had sold real flowers at that market in years. By 10:30, I was restocking from buckets under the table. By noon, I'd sold out completely. $340 in a cigar box, mostly fives, and my face aching from a shape. It wasn't used to holding. I won't pretend $340 is riches. It was less than a week of double shifts. But every bill in that box had grown out of ground I'd rented under my own signature, and money like that carries different weight. Word travels the way word travels in a town like Hartwell. 2 church ladies from my mother's own congregation stopped by, recognized me, and got very interested in smelling the sweet peas. Before the market even closed, my phone buzzed with a number I hadn't seen since Thanksgiving. One line, a market stall. Congratulations. That was the whole message. And if you've ever had a mother like mine, you can hear the exact tone. Congratulations, pronounced the way you'd say, "Oh, honey." I read it twice, dropped the phone in the cash box with the fives, and sold my last 3 bouquets. I never answered it. The field answered for me all summer long. In July, a bride named Hannah stopped at my stall, teared up over the snapdragons, and asked if I did weddings. I said yes, with the total confidence of someone who had never once done a wedding. $850 for late August, bridal bouquet, 5 mason jars per table, arch flowers. I spent 2 weeks reading and 1 sleepless night floating stems in every vessel June owned, hauling it all in a cooler rigged out of a chest freezer box and bagged ice. Late August is when the dahlias came in. Grandma Ruth's crimson strain broke open into fat, saucers, that impossible velvet red, and I built Hannah's bouquet around 9 of them. At the reception, 3 different women asked the caterer who'd done the flowers. The caterer pointed straight at me. "The Dahlia girl," she said, and it stuck the way only accidental. Nicknames do. Hannah's mother booked her anniversary party on the spot. 2 bridesmaids. Took my number written in florist's crayon on craft paper, because I didn't have cards yet, and June laughed at me the whole drive home. Something had shifted, and I could feel it, the way you sense a season turning through a window before you open the door. The stall wasn't a stall anymore. It had become something that needed a name, by labor. Day weekend, it had one. My best friend Maddie Price had been showing up Saturdays since June, first for gossip, then for a paycheck. She's the one who sanded an old fence board, painted Bishop Blooms on it in buttermilk white, and screwed it onto the market stall, before I could object. Bishop Blooms. My name, in paint, in public. I stood there feeling exposed by it, which tells you everything about how I was raised. By September, the operation looked like an actual business if you squinted kindly. 25 Porch subscription customers got a wrapped bouquet every Friday. Peak Saturday. Markets cleared $600. Hannah's wedding photos were circulating through every engaged woman in the county. I paid June for season 2, in full, early, mostly 2. Watch her fight down a smile. She took the cash and complained the trellis rows were crooked, which in June speak meant congratulations. Here's what I want you to notice, though, because it matters for what's coming. I still worked. The back of the stall. Maddie handled the customers. I kept my hat brim low and my hands busy. Some habits are load-bearing. Being seen still felt like standing in a doorway I hadn't been invited through. Meanwhile, Grandma Ruth's Sunday updates kept coming. Brianna had dropped an online course in June and gone silent. My mother had stopped mentioning me at church, which Ruth said was its own kind of mention. The whole town was doing arithmetic, my mother couldn't stop them from doing. A girl who supposedly stormed off over a party doesn't usually resurface a year later with a field, a sign, and a waiting list. Then, the Tuesday after Labor Day, an unfamiliar number lit up my phone. The county. Paper. and the first word out of my mouth was no. Her name was Dana Whitfield, and she wrote the paper's farm and table column. Someone at the market had tipped her off. I suspected the goat soap woman who treated my life as her personal soap opera. Dana wanted a profile, young grower, heirloom dahlias, the whole package. My mouth said, "Oh, no, thank you," before my brain even sat up. Pure reflex, the training of a girl raised to pass. The microphone down the table. I told June about it that evening, expecting her to agree, since June regarded publicity, roughly the way she regarded aphids. Instead, she set her coffee down with a click. "Girl, 4. A whole year other people have been telling your story at every supper table in this county, and you handed them the pen because keeping your head down felt like good manners." She pushed the mug aside. "You hide your face. They'll keep writing your story for you." That. Reporters handing the pen back. "Take it." I called Dana back the next morning. She showed up Thursday with a photographer, walked. My rose for 2 hours and asked questions nobody in my family had ever bothered to ask. Why dahlias? Why flowers at all? What had the frost taught me? What did the sign mean? When the photographer went looking for a backdrop, I did the bravest thing I'd done since, that September night with 2 duffel bags. I didn't hide behind an armload of stems, didn't. Put Maddie beside me. I stood alone, dead center in the crimson row, apron on, dirt on my knuckles, and looked straight into the lens. The story ran the following Thursday, front of the features section. By noon, my mother had read it. By that night, so had everyone she'd ever fed her version to. The headline, "The 18-year-old behind Bishop Bloom's." There was the field, the sign, the velvet red, dahlias, and me, looking at the camera like someone entitled to be in the photograph. Dana had written it clean and warm. The greenhouse job at 14, the lease 2 acres, the frost, the wedding, the heirloom tubers from my grandmother. She never once mentioned my parents, which read louder in Hartwell than anything she could have printed outright. The town did the math in one sitting. Women I'd never met signed up for the subscription, with notes like, "So proud of you, honey." The church ladies who'd once inspected my suite. Peas now stopped by the stall to say things like, "Your grandmother must be thrilled," and my mother's version of events. Tantrum, party, abandonment. Quietly folded, the way A. Lie folds when a photograph walks into the room. She called Friday morning. No hello. "You put our family's business in the newspaper, Celeste." I pointed out that the article never mentioned my family at all. "Exactly," she said, voice shaking in a register I'd never heard from her. "Everyone's asking your sister what she's doing now, at the pharmacy, at church. Do you understand what that does to her?" Of course you don't. You've always been fine. You have no idea what it's like for her. I looked out over 2 acres of proof and said, gently, "You're right, Mom. I don't." And then, for thee. First time in my entire life, I hung up first. Brianna, for her part, said nothing at all. No text, no message relayed through Ruth. In a house built on broadcasting every feeling at full volume, silence was a brand new instrument. I should have wondered harder what it was tuning up for, because the next call came from my grandmother, and it came with a demand. Grandma Ruth turned 80 at the end of September and called me herself, which she basically never did, phones being, in her view, a passing fad. "They're fighting over my birthday," she said. "Patty wants the church hall. Your mother wants the house, so she can manage things." A pause, and I could hear her smiling around her own idea. I told them I want it in your field, in the middle of something honest. And I already announced it to thee. Whole family, so nobody can wiggle out. I sat down hard on a bucket. My field. 30-some bishops and bishop-adjacent relatives, including 2 parents and 1 sister I hadn't laid eyes on in a year, standing in the middle of. Everything I'd built from the wreckage they'd handed me. "Grandma," I said, "Mom will never come." "She'll come," Ruth said, flat as a griddle. "Skipping my 80th, this year, in front of everyone? Your mother would rather chew glass." That's exactly why I picked it. Sweet. P, it's my birthday. I get one present. I'm picking myself. She wanted the truth in the room. This woman wanted it planted somewhere nobody could talk over it. Now, friend, before we step into that field together, I want an honest answer down in the comments. Would you have let them come? Because I nearly said no. I stood in my rows for an hour after that call, arguing it out with the Dahlias. The canceled party, the emptied account, the year of silence. Tell me what you'd have done. And if you're new here, subscribe now, because a canceled 18th birthday is about to collide with an 80th. 1 week out, my mother called with a small favor. 2 weeks after I'd hung up on her, she opened with logistics like nothing had happened. How many chairs would there be? Shade, should Patty bring her lemon bars? Then, casually, the way you'd slip a blade into a picnic basket. One small thing, sweetheart. When people ask about the farm, and they will, it would mean the world if you presented it as a family project. Because honestly, if you think about it, that's what it is. You had to learn that work ethic somewhere. I actually laughed. One short, involuntary syllable. She pressed on, her voice sweetening the way it always did right before the real ask. And we think it would be healing, Dr. Feldman thinks. It would be healing for Brianna to have a role there. Events, parties, that sort of thing. She has such an eye. Doesn't need to be formal, just. If it comes up, you could mention. Brianna handles events for Bishop Bloom's. She needs a win, Celeste. You have so many now. There it was, the billing department reopening for business. My party, my savings, and now the ask had simply scaled up with the harvest. My name, my field, my year of frost, and double shifts, reissued as a family project with my sister grafted into the story like a transplant the body was expected to accept. No, Mom, I said, as calmly as I could manage, which by then was quite calm. The farm isn't an apology, and it isn't a prop. But you're both welcome Sunday, as guests. I'd genuinely like you there. The silence stretched a beat too long. Fine, she said lightly, and I thought I'd shut the door on the ambush. Looking back, I'd only locked the front one. The party landed on the last Sunday of September, almost exactly a year since I'd hauled. 2 duffel bags down my parents' stairs. Saturday we set up. Maddie and June dragged. Long tables into the aisle between the dahlia rows, and I strung lights through the fence, posts and the young maple by the gate, the exact kind of lights I'd once planned for a backyard on Maple Street. Yes, I noticed, and yes, I hung them anyway. We cut 200 stems of Ruth's crimson and stood them in zinc buckets down the tables. The field was at its absolute peak, that late September flush when dahlias burn brightest right before frost, like they know what's coming. Mid-afternoon, a familiar truck rolled up the lane. My father, alone, with 40 folding chairs, from the church hall. We hadn't stood face to face in a year. He got out, looked down the rows a long moment, and said, "Ground drain's good here." A love letter, in my father's dialect. We set up chairs together for an hour, mostly silent. Twice he stopped, half-turned, toward me, mouth already open, and both times folded it back up and tucked it away, same, as that $60 in fives. At the gate, leaving, he tried once more and only got as far as, "Your grandmother's real proud." Then he drove off toward the house where my mother waited, no doubt ironing both the outfits and the story. Maddie found me watching his taillights. "Ready for tomorrow?" "No," I said. "Set the coffee. Out anyway." The next afternoon, 31 members of my family walked into my field. Every single one showed up. Even her, especially her. They arrived in a caravan of sensible sedans, and I watched 31 people encounter my field for the first time. You could see it land on, each face at the gate, conversations trailing off mid-sentence, cousins lifting their phones, Uncle Ray actually removing his cap. Late September had dressed the place better than I ever could have. 200 crimson dahlias down the long tables, the light gone gold, the rose burning red, clear to the fence line. Grandma Ruth arrived like visiting royalty, took one slow lap of the center aisle on Patty's arm, and installed herself at the head table where she could keep watch over both the cake and the truth. My mother stepped out of the car in her navy church dress, and I'll give her this. She never once looked surprised. She toured the tables like a hostess, straightening a jar here, angling a bucket there, telling Aunt Carol, "Oh, we always knew Celeste had the gift. She gets it from my side. I grew things before the girls came along. Smooth as frosting. A year of tantrum and abandonment, repaved in one afternoon into we always knew. I let it pass. The field didn't need me to argue on its behalf. Brianna arrived last, 40 minutes late, in a dress far too formal for folding chairs, her hair done up like armor. She hugged Grandma Ruth for the photo, accepted a glass of lemonade. She never touched, then drifted the perimeter alone, reading my life like an audit. I watched. Her stop at the gate, in front of Maddie's fence board sign. Bishop Bloom's Buttermilk. White, and stand there, motionless, far longer than anyone stands in front of a sign. Patty appeared at my elbow with lemon bars and a look. "You okay?" First question she'd asked. Me all year that wasn't an accusation. "Ask me at sundown," I said. Just before the toasts, I went to cut a few last stems for the cake table and found my mother, standing alone at the far end of the crimson row, where the party noise thinned into just bees. She hadn't heard me coming. She was touching one of the big saucer blooms with 2 fingers, barely, the way you'd touch a sleeping infant, or a stove you suspect is still hot. Her face had traveled somewhere I'd never once been invited. "We had roses like this," she said. "Not really." Behind the house on Delancey Street. I started a whole flat of seedlings. The spring I was 19. Zinnias, asters. I kept a notebook. I went still, the way you do, when a wild thing hasn't noticed you yet. Then your Grandma Ellen got sick, and it took 2 years start to finish, and I was the one. Denny couldn't handle the hospital, so it was me, every day, before work and after. Her fingers left the pedal. He got the truck when she passed, you know. Everyone kept saying how strong he'd had to be. My flat of seedlings just dried up on the windowsill. Nobody watered it. Everyone was too busy telling Denny how strong he was going to have to be. For the length of one breath, standing in a row my own hands had made, I saw all the way into her. A girl with a notebook, run through the identical machine 30 years before me. My throat came undone. I almost said, "Mom, I know, and I mean that, in my whole life, that's the closest we've ever come." Then she felt me there, and her spine snapped back into place, and the visitor left her face like a light switching off in a farmhouse window. "That's life, Celeste," she said briskly, already turning back toward the tables. "The strong ones carry it. That's what love is." She walked back to the party. I stood in the row and let the bees keep the silence. Then the spoon rang against glass. Grandma Ruth rose without help, which she wanted, noted, and lifted her lemonade toward the field. 80 years, she said, and I've had my birthdays in kitchens, church halls, and once, memorably, a hospital. This is the first one I've ever had in the middle of something honest. She turned toward the buckets of crimson on the tables. "My mother grew this dahlia. I grew it the year Tommy was born, and every year since. Last fall, I handed the tubers to my granddaughter because a flower like this needs hands that show up in frost. And I know showing up hands when I see them." She looked straight at me, her chin trembling, her voice not. It never had a proper name, that flower. So, today I'm naming it, in front of witnesses, so it sticks. Ruth's Crimson, grown by Celeste. Bishop, on Celeste Bishop's farm. This field is the most honest thing this family has grown in. 30 years. The applause came warm and real, 31 faces turning toward me, and for once in my life I stood in the light and didn't scan for the exits. That's the exact moment my mother rose, from her chair, glass raised high, riding the applause like a woman catching a departing train. And one more happy bit of news, everyone, while we're all together. Her voice, carried clean to the fence posts. You've all read about our Celeste in the paper. Well, Bishop Bloom's is becoming a true family business. Brianna, honey, stand up. Brianna's going to be running all the events and parties here at the farm. Both our girls, together. We are just so proud of our girls. The clapping started again, uncertain, the way crowds clap when something feels wrong, but nobody wants to be first to say so. Down the table, Aunt Patty's eyes found mine and asked the question directly. Beside my mother, Brianna was rising slowly to her feet, glass in hand, already shaking. I didn't raise my voice. I've turned this over many times since, and I'm certain of that, because a lifetime of practice holds even when your ears are ringing. I looked at my mother. Across the long table, 31 relatives between us. That's not true, Mom, and it's not going to happen. The uncertain clapping died out flat, like a frost report. My mother's smile held its position, but something behind it was working hard, and she opened her mouth to smooth it over. And never got the chance, because Brianna's glass hit the table and my sister made a sound. I'd never heard from her before. A laugh with the bottom torn clean out of it. Of course it's not true, she said, too loud, then louder. Nothing about us is true. You want to clap for the girls? You want to actually hear about the girls? She swung toward the relatives like a lawn. Sprinkler. You think she built this alone? You know they canceled her 18th birthday because I cried, canceled the party, kept the cake, changed the name on it. My name. I ate that cake. She was crying now, mascara running, 22 years of curated fragility, burning off like morning fog. And the money. Oh, you should hear about the money. They took her savings, $8,500, her money, her paychecks, and poured it into me, into Columbus, and I flushed it in 11 days, the way I flush everything. My mother was on her feet, saying her name in that same triage nurse voice. Brianna, sweetheart, you're not well. And Brianna wheeled on her, arm flung wide, hand catching. The zinc bucket on the head table. It went over slow, the way disasters tend to. Water, sheeted across the linen. 24 stems of Ruth's crimson spilled and rolled into the September grass, red against green, in front of the entire family. In the silence that followed, Aunt Patty stood up, white to the lips, looked straight at my mother, and said, "You told us she left over a party." What I remember best about the minute after that is the stillness. A whole field of people, frozen. June by the coffee urn, arms crossed, watching my mother the way you'd watch a hawk circling a henhouse. Brianna sobbing into her hands, smaller than I'd ever seen her. My mother on her knees in the grass in her navy dress, gathering fallen dahlias into her arms. One by one, because her hands needed something to do while her whole empire did the math. Then she looked up at me and said it low, just for the two of us, while the field held its breath behind me. Fix this. You can fix this, Celeste. Her eyes were wet and completely steady. Tell them the party was a misunderstanding. Tell them we helped you start this place. We're your parents. It's barely even a lie. Give your sister the events job. That's all. And this goes back together. And you come home. Sunday dinners, your room, your family. You can finally come home, sweetheart. Here's the part I need you to understand. I wanted it. 11 years later, I can say that plainly. Every cell in me that was ever 7 years old wanted it, because it was the actual prize, finally held out in the open air. My mother asking me to come home. All I had to do was pay for it. Same currency as always. Shrink the truth. hand over the story, share the name on. My own sign, disappear at my own table one more time. I looked at her arms full of my grandmother's flowers. I listened to the field behind me, finally seeing. "You're right, Mom," I said, my voice level as a floor. "I've always been fine on my own. You made sure I got the practice." Her arms tightened around the stems. "But I'm not buying my seat back. Not with the truth. Not with the farm. Not with me. You're welcome at my table, both of you, as guests. Any Sunday you like. That's the whole offer. It doesn't go on sale." My mother stood up slowly, dahlias still in her arms. For 1 second, even then, I thought. But then she laid the flowers on the table like evidence, took Brianna by the hand, and walked out of my field without looking back. She never has, not once, since. The party didn't so much end as exhale. Ruth announced to nobody in particular that it was the best birthday she'd had in 80 years, and she wouldn't hear differently, and somehow that gave everyone permission to linger another hour. Patty cut the cake with trembling hands, kept glancing at me like a woman rereading a letter she'd misfiled. My father stood at the gate a long time after my mother's car pulled out. He'd ridden over with Uncle Ray. I realized later, on purpose. When I brought him his jacket, he turned his cap over in his hands, like a wheel he was trying to steer. "I should have said something at your birthday," he told thee. Gravel. "I've been saying nothing for 20 years, Celeste. Turns out it's the loudest thing I ever did." I told him I knew. Not it's okay. I was done handing that one out. Just, "I know, Dad." He nodded, climbed into Ray's truck, and drove home to the house he'd chosen every single day of my life, because that's who he was. But starting that November, letters began. Arriving, one a month, his handwriting like barbed wire, 4 lines at a time. Saw dahlias on a calendar at the feed store. Thought of you. Ground froze early this year. Dad, I kept every one. Once the last taillights left, June and Maddie stacked chairs. Ruth stood sentry over thee. Cake plate, and I walked alone to the far end of the crimson row as the evening came down. Blue and cold. One stem lay snapped where the bucket had tipped. I picked it up, stood there in the dark field that belonged to me, and finally landed the thing I'd been circling all year. I'd stopped paying rent a year earlier, but I'd kept waiting for the landlord to drive by, see the garden, and want me back. That was over now. It had walked itself out of the field, on its own 2 feet. Ruth's voice carried down the row behind me, ordering Maddie to put the broken stem in water. "Cut flowers aren't dead flowers," she called. "Somebody bring that inside. Here's where everything's settled, in the plain arithmetic of afterward." The family cracked, exactly the way the town still tells it. Patty showed up at the farm the following weekend, with lemon bars and an apology she'd written out longhand so she wouldn't fumble it, and read it to me at the potting bench while we both pretended June wasn't listening from the seed room. Sunday dinners moved to Grandma Ruth's little kitchen on Maple Street. Ruth, Patty, Maddie, half the time, me smelling of eucalyptus and cooler water. Nobody at that table has ever once asked me to make myself smaller. My mother tried out a new version for a while. Brianna was overtired. Celeste is going through a phase. You know how girls are. But a story needs an audience, and hers kept, transferring their loyalty to the other side of the aisle, in some cases literally. She still lives, 2 miles up the road. We haven't spoken since she walked out of that field, and I've made peace with the real possibility that we never will, because peace was only ever on offer at a price I don't pay anymore. My father writes his 4 lines a month and slips a 20 into the envelope at Christmas like contraband, loving me the way a man loves from inside a fence. He built himself. I've stopped grading him on it. It's what he has. And Brianna, one night that winter, past midnight, my phone lit up with the first words. She'd sent me in over a year. The flowers were beautiful. That was it. No apology, no follow-up. When I saw her across the pharmacy in March, she looked at her shoes. I heard. She'd moved in with a friend in Columbus, landed a job at a garden center, of all places on this whole round earth. I never answered that text. I never deleted it either. Some seeds you. Just leave in the packet and see how you feel come spring. The farm kept on being a farm, which is the quiet miracle of farms. Season 3 sold out its subscriptions by April. Ruth's Crimson went into the ground in May, 300 tubers, strong, every single one descended from a shoebox. In June, a girl named Sadie started, showing up. 14, 4-H, all elbows and silence, the kind of kid who wins ribbons. Nobody bothers to drive out and see. Her mother needed her to be no trouble, and Sadie was doing her level best to oblige, and I recognized the species on sight. I pay her real wages. I make her invoice me out loud, looking me in the eye, and the first time she managed it without apologizing. I gave her a raise on the spot. Last week I caught her, shooing a customer's kid away from the seedling trays, hands on her hips, taking up her entire share of the doorway, and I had to go stand in the cooler for a minute. That's the crop I'm proudest of, if you're asking. Not the flowers. The girl learning 3 years faster than I did, that she's allowed to send a bill for what she gives, and that anyone who only loves her when she's invisible isn't family. They're just a landlord with your childhood photos on the wall. If there's one thing I'd carve into a fence board and nail up where every fine-on-her-own girl could read it, it's this: love you have to earn by disappearing isn't love, it's rent. And the day you stop paying, you finally find out who is family and who is only ever collecting. That's my story. A canceled cake, a shoebox of dahlia tubers, 2 acres, and 1 signature. If you've ever been the strong one at your family's table, I hope you plant something of your own this year and stand somewhere it can be seen. Tell me in the comments what you'd have said in that field. And if this one stayed with you, subscribe to Arma Never Sleeps. Next week, another woman tells the whole truth, calmly, all the way to the end.